Normally, when we're working with an EQ, we refer to certain parts of the frequency spectrum in terms of hertz, right? But in music, every note corresponds with a set of specific frequency values that we might be particularly interested in adjusting. Now, in the Melodyne sound editor, you have access to an EQ that actually divides up the frequency spectrum into semitone bands instead of just hertz alone, which is pretty unique and quite useful in a few scenarios. So I want to take a look at a few of them today. So let's go ahead and start with just some basic piano chords here. And the piano is actually a nice instrument for us to start with because it's very harmonically rich, and so it'll be easier to hear some of those differences in the things that we adjust. And if you want to open up the sound editor, just go up to these bars on the top left and click this icon here, and it'll pull up this part of the screen. And the 4 sliders at the bottom here are really what we're going to be particularly interested in, and especially the tonality slider. And so what this does is as you pull it across in either direction, it starts isolating either the frequencies that are within the key or outside of the key that we're in. And we're currently in B flat major. So let's take a listen to what it sounds like when we start to listen to all the frequencies outside of the key by dragging it to the left here. So we can hear that obviously sounds a little bit strange, but that's okay because these frequencies aren't necessarily bad, even though they do sound a little strange on their own. They all contribute to the overall character of this piano, so we don't necessarily want to remove them altogether. But what I do want to do right now is go to the other side and have you listen to what just the frequencies inside of B flat major sound like. So instead of being extreme here, let's be a little more subtle with it, because sometimes I just like to gently nudge it in the direction toward the frequencies of the key that we're in. So let's take a listen to that. And we can also make individual adjustments to any one of these bands. So, if we feel like one of these frequencies is a little bit overbearing, even if it is in the same key that we're in, we can just, we can take it down a little bit. So it's kind of a unique way of looking at an EQ because you don't have to go through and calculate, like, say what a C would be in somewhere around 2K. You can just literally look at this band right here and take it down if you need to. But let's try something similar with some bells instead of a piano. And bells are kind of an interesting instrument to take a look at because their harmonic distribution is pretty uneven in general. So it can often be a good candidate for that reason. So let's take a listen to what this bell sounds like. So you can see from the spectral analysis of the harmonic distribution of this particular bell sound that there's a huge peak right here. And we can actually soften the difference in height between these bands by using the contour slider, which is at the bottom left here, the second slider from the left. So watch what happens when I take this down just a little bit. It just starts to even out and flatten a little bit, which can be a nice way to mellow out the sound. It's also important to note too that you can use this EQ in a similar way to a conventional EQ. So if I select like this group of bands here, let's say that I felt like this particular part of the sound was a little too overbearing. I can just take this down a little bit. And now if it's sounding a little too dark for us, we can actually just use this brilliance slider on the bottom left here and just pepper in a little bit of brightness back in there. And now, of course, we can use a similar process to what we did with the piano, where we can take a listen to what the frequencies sound like outside of the key, and then maybe just sweeten it up by nudging it in the direction of the frequencies inside of the key, which is to the right here. I find with bells that this can be a really nice option to just focus it in on those frequencies that matter the most with whatever key that you're working in. And by the way, you don't just have to use this on instruments, you can actually use this on drum sounds and percussion sounds, which I also find it to be pretty useful for. So if we had a percussion loop over the top of this bell sound that we were just messing with, let's take a listen to what this would sound like. For percussion loops like this, we can actually use an algorithm inside of Melodyne called percussive pitched for this very purpose. And if you need to change the algorithm, you can just go up to the top here and go to algorithm and then just make sure that it's on percussive pitched. So Melodyne interprets this somewhere between A and A flat. So if I just select this and double click it and get it all locked into one key, let's see what happens when we move this up to the key that we're in, which, if you recall, is B flat major. Okay, so I'm just gonna select all of this with Command A, and I'm gonna bring it up to B flat and see how this jives with our bell sound. But we can actually take this a little bit further by using, once again, the tonality slider, my favorite. So I'm just gonna solo this percussion loop so you can hear exactly what we're doing. Another way that you can use this EQ is you can actually isolate a specific note across the frequency spectrum that you want to increase or decrease all at the same time. So let's say I wanted to increase all of the B flats. All I do is find B flat on the note display at the bottom here, and we just double click the one that we're interested in, and it'll select all of it for us, and then we can just increase it or decrease it, and you can hear what it starts to do. And if you wanted to take this even further, you could always add on by sliding this tonality slider a little bit more without changing any of the settings that we have right now with our B flats being exaggerated. Another percussion element that you can think about using this on are snare drums. So if we added in a snare drum to this little, I guess, mini beat that we have going here. Now again, we're in percussive pitch mode, just like we were with the percussion loop. And I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna select all the notes with Command A, and then just double click and lock them onto what looks like a G flat here. And I'm gonna raise this up to a B flat and see what it sounds like in our song. We can, of course, isolate the B flat sort of root note of the snare drum right now and increase that if you want just a little more beef here. But instead of isolating a single note like this, or like we've been doing, sometimes I like to use a group of notes, but centered on the note that represents the key that we're in. So if we wanted to increase maybe like the upper mid-range, we could just find a B flat that's further up in the frequency spectrum. So somewhere, say, like around 4K. We're just gonna do a nice broad stroke adjustment to this area. And once you've made a selection like this, you can actually select all the octaves that are available to adjust by just double clicking, and it'll do them all for you. So you can make adjustments like this as well. One great detail about this EQ as well is that it always compensates for the gain changes that you induce when you make some of these changes. So if I make this snare sound way brighter, it'll always be the same relative level that it was with the original. So check this out. And if you just want to go back to how you had it before, you can just hold Command and click this slider. You can also select all the bars with Command A and then hold Command again and click here, and it will reset back to the way that it was. Or alternatively, you can just reset everything just by going to Reset All, and you're back to where you were. It's important to emphasize that the frequencies that exist outside of the key aren't necessarily undesirable in any way, but the fact that we can have an influence on them gives us lots of interesting tonal shaping options. I mean, you can imagine that if you only use the frequencies outside of the key, it could lend itself pretty nicely to a sound design context, for example. So anyway, just some nice options for you to consider. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.